What is the strangest mystery that's still unsolved? The Circleville Letters. In 1976, residents of the small city south of Columbus, Ohio, began receiving handwritten, sinister and graphic letters. Each letter included secret and dark details about their personal lives. One resident received a ton of letters, accusing her of various unsavory acts. The author warned the resident that he had been keeping an eye on her home, as well as her comings and goings. The resident was horrified and tried to keep the letter a secret until her husband began receiving them. The attacks on the family continued, with large posters appearing around town spreading rumours about their 12-year-old child. One day in 1977, the husband left the house after receiving a call from who he thought was writing the letters. A few minutes later, the husband was found dead at the end of the street behind the wheel. The sheriff had ruled it a homicide when he realised that a single shot had been fired before the accident, but there was no evidence that the husband was shot at the site. The sheriff found the husband was twice the legal limit and ruled it a drunk driving accident. The letters began once again, this time accusing the sheriff of covering up the true nature of the death. The letters also accused the sheriff of mishandling an investigation into the county coroner, who had been accused of other grotesque acts. The harassment continued, this time with signs along the road, and in 1983, the original resident who had been accused of having an affair pulled over to remove a sign. During the effort to remove the sign, she discovered a box was attached, and inside of it was a small pistol. The gun was part of a booby trap designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Freshour was arrested and given 25 years, but one small problem. The letter writing continued even after Freshour was put in jail. In a new batch of letters, the author had promised to dig up the grave of a deceased baby and mail the bones to the police in the case of another potential affair turned murder. Hundreds of residents continued to receive personal letters until 1994, when everything stopped. The Oakville Blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, only the raindrops were a strange, clear substance that had the consistency of jello. Lots of people experienced flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and people's dogs and cats all over the city were dying. When a local hospital ran a lab test on the substance after one of the patients suggested it, it was found that whatever this mysterious rain was, it had human white blood cells in it. Sometime after that, a sample was also sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where it was being researched by epidemiologist Mike McDowell. After he determined that it was man-made and speculated that it was some sort of matrix for transporting viruses or bacteria, the samples suddenly went missing from the containment facility, and his supervisor told him not to ask any questions. There are no known samples of the stuff anywhere today, despite being sent to several different facilities by various Oakville residents. So yeah, I'd personally say this was clearly some sort of bioweapon test run, but by whom? I'd like to give the US government the benefit of the doubt here and assume it wasn't us testing something like that on our own citizens, but if it wasn't, why would it have been covered up like that? And you'd think that an event like this would be a lot less obscure. Also, even if it being a bioweapon seems super obvious, how the heck did whoever dispersed it manage to make it rain over an entire city for several days? On April 19th, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion killed 168 in what was the deadliest terror attack on the United States until 9/11. To date, it still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser-known things about this is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lakeshah Levy. The only problem was she'd already been buried with both her legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed in her coffin while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, a DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now, 25 years after the attack. A strange but not creepy mystery: the disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Bader. He was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio, who went missing in 1957. He went fishing, a storm hit, and his boat was found the next day with some damage. He was in debt and in trouble with the IRS, and his wife was about to have their 3rd child. 4 days later, John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Fritz was known for his wild personality. He attracted local attention for sitting atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio. He became a radio announcer and a TV sports director. He drove around in a hearse with a bar and became a minor celebrity in Omaha, by no means avoiding attention. In 1964, a cancerous tumour was found behind his left eye and it had to be removed. In 1965, Fritz was in Chicago for a tournament, and an acquaintance from Akron recognized him and confronted him, and then brought Bader's niece to take a look. She agreed it was her uncle and confronted him about it as well. Fritz denied it but found it humorous. Fritz's fingerprints were then matched to Larry Bader's military records, and it was confirmed. Fritz Johnson always maintained he had no memory of his former life as Larry Bader. Psychiatrists examined him and believed he was telling the truth, even though he had financial reasons to assume a new identity, and the concept of someone forgetting their past and entirely constructing a different one with false memories is hard to fathom. It is also considered a possibility that the eye tumour had something to do with it. He ultimately died in 1966 from the eye tumour, and it was never determined conclusively whether he was lying or not. Literally any dig site in archaeology, even the ones that are just garbage and potsherds, are really fascinating if you try to really picture the people behind them, what they thought and felt. Actually, garbage probably tells you more about people than anything else, really. But my favourite is the Chauvet Cave. If you have a chance, watch Werner Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams. I think it's still on Netflix. It has some of the most stunning cave art in the world, which almost certainly has some kind of profound significance, and we don't, and will likely never, know what it is. Moreover, there's evidence that the cave was abandoned for thousands of years and later returned to, only for the returnees to continue to make paintings in the exact same style, and possibly for the exact same reasons. There's so much to be seen in these figures. There's a portrait of an animal tossing its head that looks like one of the world's earliest examples of stop motion or sequential art. When I look at it, I can feel the will of the painter, who wanted so much to convey this sort of motion. There are also the footprints of a boy who arrived much later to the cave than its original users, whose marks appear to be contemporary with the paw prints of a wolf. It's hard to say now. According to Cave of Forgotten Dreams, whether they walked together, whether they walked 20 years apart, whether they were friends, or whether the wolf was stalking the boy. But I read a blog post by a professional hunter and tracker who looked at the footage of the prints of the film and said they likely walked together. I wonder what they were thinking, if the boy had some knowledge of what he would find there, or if he was simply exploring a cave and found some of the greatest art in human history. The toxic death of Gloria Ramirez. 23 people became ill due to her mere presence, and 5 were hospitalized. We have never worked out what happened. About 8:15 p.m. on the evening of February 19, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from severe heart palpitations, was brought into the emergency department of Riverside General Hospital by paramedics. She was extremely confused and was suffering from tachycardia and Cheyne-Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body, and some noticed a fruity, garlic-like odour that they thought was coming from her mouth. A registered nurse named Susan Kane attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julia Gorinsky, a medical resident, who noticed manila-coloured particles floating in the blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room. Shortly thereafter, Gorinsky began to feel nauseated, complaining that she was lightheaded. She left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting in the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency department patients to the parking lot outside. Overall, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized. A skeleton crew stayed behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m, after 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to cancer. The Overton Bridge. It's a bridge in Scotland where dogs always unexplainably jump off. It's very strange, and nobody knows for certain why they do this. Dogs who survived reportedly walked back up and jumped off again. They even had to put a warning sign to keep your dog on a leash and watch them. A lot of theories said maybe it's because of certain scents or animals down below, but most people have disagreed with this theory. It's fucking weird. The Salish Seafeet, or the Mad Axemen of New Orleans. The Salish Seafeet are the approximately 20 dismembered feet found in or around British Columbia or Washington, USA. The feet sometimes are found still inside shoes. No one knows why or how they got there or where they came from. Over the course of the last 13 years, the authorities have ruled out foul play. The Mad Axeman of New Orleans ran rampant in 1918 and 1919. He murdered 6 people, usually those of Italian descent, with axes or straight razors. In March of 1919, he sent a lengthy letter from Hottest Hell that was pretty nonsensical, but the most relevant paragraphs read, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is some of you people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." There were no murders that night because every dance hall in NOLA was filled to capacity.